I'm Christopher, and I'm happy to present the language effects team project and results. And I want to show you how important it is which prompt language you use when you're acting with a language model, especially regarding political opinions and knowledge. Next slide, please. I want to start with a quote to give you a picture. What is the project about? And here it is: language is the key to the world. Next slide, please. You can think of different doors. And if you want to open the door, you need a key to enter probably a different world. And next slide, please. And here we think of languages as the keys to unlock these doors to enter new worlds. And here we are especially focused on the political world, so opinions and knowledge, which are highly relevant if you want to get an understanding of what kind of world is embedded in the language model. Next slide, please. This comes from a lot of existing new work here showing the language sensitivity of these multilingual models, also for jailbreaking, as we have already seen in another talk. And here, the interesting part is that especially political bias tests are often focused on English and not really having this multilingual perspective. And if it's really the case that we're getting a different opinion, a different knowledge from the model just based on using a different interaction language for prompting, then it might give us a different political word by maybe assuming we will get the same. And that's why we use here AYA as an example and different pipelines to show you how we can quantize and discover these different worlds in the model. Next slide, please. So the question is it actually the language as a key to enter these political worlds? Next slide, please. And here we set up two pipelines. First, we are not just interested in the model behavior, also looked at the data more in detail to get an understanding how the language is distributed, especially regarding samples in the data which are linked to a certain language. So we labeled these different samples with statement labels, themes from political statement tests. So getting understanding how these topics and themes are distributed across the different languages. And not just that, we also try to get an understanding how the pre-stance is already in the data set. So we can maybe get an understanding of the link between the data and the actual behavior in the end of the model and comparing them. So on the other side, we have this behavioral view. We started to use existing and new political statement tests with hundreds of different statements, using it to translate the statements in the different languages, also adding a bit of variation and rephrasing for more robustness, and then getting the stances from AYA in these different languages and comparing it with an interlanguage agreement just based on the different responses from the model just by using a different prompt language. Next slide, please. What we can see for the data is that we have a highly different distribution for these political relevant topics based on the language. So especially English is very different from others. So just looking at one language might give you not the best picture of what is actually in the data set. And especially not just looking at the topics, we also looked at the stances. And what we can see is that especially for the stance here, immigrants from outside Europe should be required to accept our culture and values. It's highly negative having a disagreement regarding the stance on the English side, but not showing, and also on the French side, but not showing it, for example, with the statements in the data for the German language. So it's highly different just based on the language. Next slide, please. And we also try to get an understanding by applying and using the model behavior with getting the stances from the model regarding these political statements, applying 3 different political tests. And for the first ones, they are really common ones, political compass test and UNI test, we try to get an understanding of what is actually the stance of the model regarding these different topics. And what we're learning here is also that the alignment between the actual human serial responses with these tests and the model responses are different or not aligned for all languages similarly. So there are some which are really close to the model responses and others really, really far away. So the alignment here is a question to the actual responses. And there's also a really nice test, which is called the borderline dataset test, to get an understanding of territory knowledge aspects in such a model. So a question here is, for example, is Minera Reef a territory of Fiji or Tonga? So you get an understanding of what is embedded just based on the language. So here again, we use just different prompt languages, keeping the model the same and just getting an understanding if there's a difference. And what we can see is along all of these different political bias tests that the languages makes a difference. And here we used again the interlanguage agreement, showing a moderate agreement across all these languages, showing us that they act differently. Next slide, please. So to sum up, we can see for these political tests and showing you a pipeline to quantize this for language models to help you to get an understanding. And we can see this on the behavioral side and also for the data representation. And what we are currently into is trying to combine these two, tracing these stanzas, pre-stanzas from the data to the model behavior. Many thanks.